You know, when you think of polio, you probably think of a disease that's, well, basically history, right? A huge public health victory from a bygone era. But what if I told you that for hundreds of thousands of survivors, the fight wasn't actually over? What if it just went silent, lying in wait for decades before making a comeback?
See, after people survived the initial brutal attack of the polio virus, they got on with their lives. They built careers, raised families, and really, they thought the worst was far behind them. But for so many, their own nervous system was basically just biding its time, getting ready for a second act that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming.
And that's the big question we're diving into today. This isn't about that first infection. No, this is about the long, slow, unforeseen echo of a disease that most of us thought was completely defeated.
And get this, we're talking about a long time. For 30, sometimes even 40 years, a survivor could feel totally fine, completely stable. And then, almost out of the blue, a whole new set of progressive symptoms starts to creep in. It's this incredible medical mystery that just unfolds over the course of a lifetime. So, let's pull back the curtain on this forgotten chapter. We're going to break down what this condition actually is, how in the world you diagnose it, what scientists think is happening under the hood, and most importantly, what can be done to manage it.
All right, so let's get right down to it. What exactly is this thing? When we talk about post-polio syndrome, or PPS for short, what are we really talking about?
Well, the official definition really spells it out. PPS is this new cluster of problems that shows up at least 15 years, but often a lot longer, after someone's recovered. And just to be super clear, this is not the virus coming back. It's more like a late-stage echo of the original damage.
And we're not talking about minor aches and pains here. The symptoms can be absolutely debilitating. You've got this new wave of muscle weakness, often hitting the very same limbs that were affected decades ago. There's a profound, crushing fatigue that sleep just doesn't touch. And for some, really serious problems with breathing or swallowing can develop, which can be life-threatening. And this isn't some super rare thing that affects just a handful of people. Far from it. The estimates suggest that anywhere from 20 to a whopping 50% of all polio survivors might end up developing post-polio syndrome. That is a staggering number of people who are essentially fighting a second battle they never expected.
Okay, so if the symptoms are laid out like that, you'd think diagnosing it would be a piece of cake, right? Yeah, not so much. It turns out that identifying PPS is actually a really complex puzzle.
Here's the really tricky part. There's no magic bullet test for this. No blood test, no brain scan that can just say, yep, that's post-polio syndrome. Instead, doctors have to become detectives. They call it a diagnosis of exclusion, which is a fancy way of saying they have to methodically rule out everything else that could possibly be causing the symptoms first.
So what does that detective work look like? Well, there's a checklist. First, you got to have that confirmed history of polio. Second, there's that long, stable period we mentioned, at least 15 years. Third, the new symptoms have to come on gradually and be persistent. And finally, the big one. Every single other medical condition that might cause these problems has to be checked off the list.
And this is where you can really see just how tough this is. The main symptoms of PPS, that weakness, fatigue, and pain, look an awful lot like a bunch of other conditions. A doctor has to sift through everything from arthritis and fibromyalgia to really serious neurological diseases like ALS before they can confidently land on a PPS diagnosis. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. Why? Why does this happen so many years later? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock and look at what the polio virus did to the nervous system in the first place.
So the leading theory is actually pretty incredible. When the polio virus attacked, it killed off motor neurons. Those are the nerve cells that carry signals from your brain to your muscles. To pick up the slack, the surviving neurons became superheroes. They literally sprouted new nerve endings, reaching out to rescue the muscle fibers that had been left stranded. What you end up with are these giant, supersized motor units. Imagine one single worker suddenly having to do the job of 8 people. Well, that's what these neurons did. For decades, these superneurons were carrying this massive extra load, firing non-stop to keep the muscles going. It was this incredible, silent feat of biological engineering.
But you can probably guess where this is going. That heroic effort couldn't last forever. After 30 or 40 years of being pushed to the absolute limit, that stress just becomes too much. Those delicate new nerve endings start to wither and die back. And as they do, the muscles they control get stranded all over again. And that's what leads to the new weakness and fatigue of PPS. The very system that allowed for this amazing recovery eventually starts to burn out.
And it turns out some things can make a person more likely to develop PPS. If the original infection was more severe, that put more stress on the survivors. And here's a wild one. A better initial recovery might also be a risk factor, maybe because it meant those neurons were working even harder to compensate all those years.
Okay, so with all that said, you might be thinking this sounds pretty bleak. But here's the crucial thing. While there isn't a cure for PPS and you can't reverse that nerve damage, that does not mean there isn't hope. There's a very clear path forward that's all about managing symptoms and making sure people can live the best life possible.
And I think this quote really gets to the heart of it. The goal isn't to find some kind of silver bullet. It's all about creating a smart, personalized, strategic plan to stay as comfortable, as functional, and as independent as you can be.
And to build that plan, you need a whole toolkit. And not just one person, but a whole team of specialists, from rehab doctors and neurologists to physical and occupational therapists, all working together. They look at everything from conserving energy and managing pain to using assistive devices like canes or scooters and providing breathing support.
So what does this actually look like day to day? Well, energy conservation isn't just about taking naps. It's about being strategic, pacing yourself, and making your home more efficient. And physical therapy is vital, but it's a really careful balancing act. The goal is to strengthen muscles with things like swimming or water aerobics, but without ever pushing them to exhaustion, because that can actually make things worse. It's about building a completely new relationship with your body and your energy.
And all of this brings us to one final, really important question. The victory over polio was, without a doubt, a monumental achievement for humanity. But the story didn't end there. For the thousands of survivors now dealing with this unforeseen echo of their illness, the battle is still very real. So the question for all of us is, how can we make sure they have the awareness, the medical expertise, and the support they need to win this second fight?